Well, President Obama continues on his tour throughout Asia. He wrapped up 3 days in India, the longest time he spent overseas in any country since he's been president. Was in Indonesia for all of 20 hours, a country he spent some time in, about 4 years when he was growing up. And now he's moving on to Seoul. And the topic that's front on the agenda is the economy and trying to double exports from the United States over the next 5 years. The economy is issue number one here at home. The question is whether that should be issue number one when the president is overseas. I spoke to Secretary Bill Cohen, former defense secretary, and he also serves right now not only as a consultant, but he's on the board for the U.S.-India Business Council. And I asked him whether that was the right place for President Obama to be focused on, considering how key Indonesia is as a fast-growing democracy, most populous Muslim country in the world, and India, the world's youngest, fastest-growing democracy.
I think he can do both. The mere fact that he is traveling to India and Indonesia, to South Korea, that in itself says that the President of the United States is on a foreign policy agenda, or is pursuing one, as well as the economic one. So I think he gets that just by virtue of the fact that he's traveling. Secondly, I think it's important to send the signal back home that he's also very, very concerned about jobs. And that means there are markets out there for our business community that we need to explore and to take advantage of. And so by his trip, if he can build better relations, encourage other countries to reduce trade barriers and promote exports from the United States, that will certainly benefit us at home. And if it benefits us at home, it will help solidify the foreign policy relationships that we have.
Well, the president's in Indonesia for all of about 20 and a half hours. It's really a whirlwind tour, but he is taking the opportunity to speak at the largest mosque in Southeast Asia when he's in Jakarta. And, this is really the highest profile speech he's given in terms of outreach to the Muslim world since that pivotal speech back in Cairo in 2009. Do you think that the president has lived up to his expectations that he set for himself back in Cairo when it comes to reaching out to the Muslim world and issues in the Middle East?
I think the president has made a decision, and he is determined to try to build a better relationship with the Muslim world. There are 1 billion Muslims or more throughout the world, and we have to have a much better relationship. I think by virtue of what has happened in Iraq, Afghanistan, the question about jihad being leveled against the Western world, it's important that we try to touch the moderate Muslims and to try to persuade them that they have to take a much more aggressive attitude toward really marginalizing, if they can't eliminate, the extremists in their society, because their future depends upon that as much as ours. So I think it's a very determined president to see that we reach out as best we can to build a much stronger relationship and to increase the power of the moderate Muslims who see the radical and the extremists and the jihadists as being contrary to their religion and also contrary to their best interests.
Yeah, I mean, I know there are some who are critical that he's not spending more time talking that up while he's there. But I want to ask you about India, since you're on the Business Council. India was also the longest trip that the president spent outside the country since he became president, obviously sending a signal there. What did he accomplish in India?
Well, he accomplished several things. Number one, by going to India and talking about trade, he is opening up the prospects for U.S. companies to be able to take advantage of a very dynamic economy that's unfolding in India. They have 1.2 billion people. They will be big consumers of products coming from the United States in the future. And so by making the effort to talk about trade, and again, talking about two-way trade, because India has some restrictions against U.S. investment in the fields of real estate, financial services, and other areas, sectors. So they've got to take down some of those barriers, and we have to pursue this balanced trade relationship with India. Secondly, as you note, the president talked about the need to rebalance the global economy, and Prime Minister Singh came out in favor of what the United States is trying to do in terms of this easing of the flow of money going into the economy, which have been very criticized criticized by the Chinese, by the French, by the Russians, and others, and Germans in particular. So he now has enlisted the support of Prime Minister Singh, who's he's an economist by training and profession, and he lends a considerable voice to support what we're doing here in the United States. So that's been a big benefit, I think, for the U.S.
When you look at the local papers within South Asia, particularly with the narrative coming out of Pakistan and in India, there was some disappointment from India that there wasn't more of a timeline put on the U.S. support for that country joining the Security Council of the United Nations, and not necessarily saying, oh, we want them to have a vote as well. Do you think that it was right to sort of, do you think, first of all, that the president hedged that support, and do you think it was the right way to do it?
I don't think he hedged it. I know there have been some reports that he wasn't quite as categorical as he might have been. I think for the President of the United States to indicate that the U.S. supports India's entry into the Security Council as a permanent member, I think that is it's the first time it's been said,
right.
And I think it was important. It's an important signal to the Indians. How long that's going to take remains to be seen. This is not something that can be done by the U.S. unilaterally. It can't be done overnight, but I think it adds weight to India as it emerges as a global player.
Be sure to watch In Business tomorrow. Not only are we continuing to watch commodities climb through the roof, oil inventories will be released in the 10 a.m. hour, always market moving. And we're also going to have a really interesting conversation, I hope, with John Taylor. You know the Taylor rule. He has really written the rules for most economists these days, particularly as they gauge expectations on inflation and interest rates. He'll talk to us about what the Fed's policy should be these days. That's tomorrow on In Business.